The crisp, cream-colored envelope felt like a ghost in Naomi's hands, a relic from a life she'd fought to bury. Ethan's looping, arrogant script was a punch to the gut, an invitation to his wedding. He wanted a witness to his triumph, a ghost at the feast to highlight how far he'd soared since leaving her in the wreckage. He imagined she'd crawl there, a pathetic ruin in a thrift store dress. But he didn't know her secret. He didn't know that for the past 5 years she hadn't been just surviving. She'd been building an empire, fueled by his betrayal. And she wasn't coming alone. The rattle of the ancient radiator was the only applause Naomi received most mornings. It was a rusty, percussive sound that shook the small apartment in a rhythm she'd come to know as intimately as her own heartbeat. From her 4th-floor walk-up in Queens, the view was a tapestry of brick walls, fire escapes, and the perpetually grey New York sky. It wasn't a life she had dreamed of, but it was one she had built with her own 2 hands, brick by painful brick. 5 years. Had it really been 5 years since Ethan Blackwell had walked out, leaving nothing but a clipped, cruel note on the kitchen table and a gaping hole where their future was supposed to be? He'd called their marriage a starter marriage, a stepping stone. He was destined for corner offices and champagne flutes, he'd written, while she was not. He'd made it sound like a kindness, as if he were releasing a caged bird, when really he was just tossing her out of the nest from a great height, expecting her to plummet. In those first few months, she nearly had. The silence in their once shared apartment was a physical weight. Every corner held a memory. Ethan laughing as he tried to teach her to dance in the living room, the scent of his coffee brewing in the morning, the weight of his arm around her as they fell asleep. He had been her world, the brilliant, ambitious man who had swept her off her feet in college. He'd loved her, she was sure of it, but his love was conditional, tied to his own assent. When her father's small construction business had failed, taking their modest family savings with it, the cracks in their foundation had shattered. Ethan saw her not as a partner in hardship, but as an anchor. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It was tucked between a utility bill and a coupon mailer, its thick, creamy cardstock a stark contrast to the flimsy paper of her daily struggles. Her fingers trembled as she saw the return address, a penthouse on the Upper East Side. His handwriting, a confident, masculine scrawl she knew better than her own, was a ghost caressing her name, Naomi Park. He hadn't even used his last name for her. A deliberate surgical cut to remind her she was no longer a Blackwell. Inside, the invitation was an exercise in understated opulence, gold foil lettering on a heavy linen finish card. Ethan Blackwell and Ophelia Drake request the honor of your presence at their wedding. Below, the details of a lavish ceremony at the Plaza Hotel, a place Naomi had only ever seen in movies. A small, handwritten note was tucked inside, on a separate card bearing his personal monogram. Naomi, I know this might be awkward, but it would mean a lot to me if you were there to see this, to see how things have worked out, for both of us. No hard feelings, right? J. No hard feelings. The phrase was a lit match tossed into the tinderbox of her soul. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a summons. A command performance. He wanted her there as a prop, a living, breathing testament to his glorious new life. He wanted to see her in a cheap dress, her face etched with the struggle of the past 5 years, a perfect, pathetic counterpoint to his radiant heiress bride. He wanted to parade his victory in front of her, the woman he'd discarded like a piece of faulty equipment on his climb to the top. Her stomach churned. The old Naomi, the one who had cried for weeks, who had felt her worth shriveled to nothing under the weight of his abandonment, would have ripped it to shreds. She would have curled into a ball and let the familiar waves of shame and inadequacy wash over her. But that Naomi was gone. She had died a slow, painful death in the crucible of single motherhood and relentless hard work. Her gaze drifted to the framed photo on the small, wobbly end table. 3 identical faces, all with her dark eyes, and infuriatingly, Ethan's determined chin grinned back at her. Lily, the thoughtful, quiet one. Sienna, the boisterous, fearless leader. And Zoe, the little diplomat, the one with a smile that could disarm armies. Her triplets, the secret she had discovered just 6 weeks after Ethan had left. The secret she had never shared. When the doctor had confirmed it, her first emotion wasn't joy, but sheer, unadulterated terror. She was alone, broke, and about to be responsible for 3 tiny lives. She had considered calling him, of course. A part of her, the part that still foolishly loved him, had imagined he would rush back, that the news would change everything. But she knew him better than that. He would have seen them as he saw her, an anchor, a complication. He might have offered money, a settlement to make the problem go away, and the thought of his children being reduced to a transaction made her physically ill. So she had kept her secret. She had moved out of their apartment before the eviction notice came, found this small place, and started fighting. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, waitressing on weekends, and doing freelance graphic design in the stolen hours between. She built a small business from her kitchen table, fueled by caffeine and a desperate, burning need to give her children a life he could never diminish. Now that business, Rivera Design, wasn't so small anymore. She had clients across the country, a small team of employees, and a reputation for being brilliant and tireless. She wasn't wealthy by Ethan's new standards, but she was successful. She was proud. She was a survivor. Holding the invitation, a new feeling began to eclipse the hurt. It was a slow-burning, icy resolve. Ethan wanted a ghost at his wedding. He wanted to shame the poor, abandoned wife he'd left behind. He had no idea who he was inviting. He thought he was summoning a memory, a footnote to his life story. He had no idea he was inviting his legacy. Naomi walked over to the window, the invitation still in her hand. Below, the city hummed with a life that had once intimidated her, but now felt like an ally. It was a city of reinvention, of second acts. He had written her out of his story. Fine, it was time to write herself back in, not as a victim, but as the hero of her own. "Okay, Ethan," she whispered to the city lights, a faint, dangerous smile touching her lips. "You want me there? You got it." She would attend his perfect, opulent wedding, but she wouldn't be the woman he remembered, and she wouldn't be coming alone. Ethan Blackwell adjusted the silk knot of his tie, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic sweep of Central Park, the skyscrapers of Midtown glittering like a king's ransom. This was the view he'd always believed he deserved. It was the physical manifestation of his success, the proof that every hard decision, every sacrifice had been worth it. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. He was handsome, he knew, with a sharp jawline and intense blue eyes that could be charming or cutting, depending on the need. Today they were filled with a restless energy, a hum of anticipation that had little to do with the multi-million-dollar merger he was about to close. The wedding was in 2 weeks, his wedding, to Ophelia Drake. The name alone was a symphony of power and old money. Her father, Ricardo de la Cruz, was a titan of industry, a man whose name opened doors that Ethan had once only dreamed of knocking on. Marrying Ophelia wasn't just a union of love, it was an acquisition. It was the final, cementing move in his ascent from the ambitious son of a middle-class family to a genuine player in the city's elite. Ophelia was perfect. She was beautiful, elegant, and possessed a quiet grace that bespoke a lifetime of privilege. She adored him, looked at him with a kind of reverent awe that soothed the frantic, insecure beast that still lived deep inside him. She saw the man he presented to the world, confident, brilliant, utterly in control. She didn't see the man who still woke up some nights in a cold sweat, terrified that it could all be snatched away, that he would be exposed as an imposter. His phone buzzed on the polished mahogany desk, a text from Ophelia. "Thinking of you, my love. Can't wait to be your wife. 3. He smiled, a genuine warm smile, and typed back a quick reply. He did love her in his way. He loved what she represented. He loved the security she offered. But it was a comfortable, calculated love, a world away from the messy, all-consuming passion he had once shared with Naomi. The thought of Naomi was an unwelcome intrusion, a ghost at the feast of his success. He'd mailed the invitation yesterday, the handwritten note a stroke of what he considered magnanimous genius. It was a power move, plain and simple. For years he'd been haunted by a sliver of guilt over how he'd left things. Not guilt over leaving her. That had been a necessary, strategic amputation. But guilt over the sloppiness of it. The note on the table had been cowardly. This invitation was his way of rewriting that ending. He would bring her into his world for one night, let her see the life he had built, the wife he had chosen. It was a form of closure. He imagined her shuffling into the plaza, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and envy. He pictured her wearing something ill-fitting, her face showing the strain of the years. He would be gracious, of course. He would introduce her to Ophelia, a model of benevolent victory. "This is Naomi," he would say. "We were married once, a long time ago." And in that moment, everyone would see the contrast. Everyone would understand why he had made the choices he had. It would validate everything. The cruelty of it was a flavor he didn't fully admit to himself. He framed it as generosity, as a desire to show her there were no hard feelings. But the truth, the dark, coiled thing in his gut, was that he needed to see her fail. He needed her to be a footnote, a cautionary tale he had narrowly escaped. Her quiet ambition, her fierce intelligence, he had once admired them. But after her family lost everything, those same qualities felt like a threat, a reminder of a life of struggle he was desperate to outrun. He needed to believe that she had been a dead end, that her potential had withered without him. "Ethan?" Ricardo de la Cruz's voice boomed from the doorway. He was a formidable man, with a mane of silver hair and a tailored suit that probably cost more than Naomi's monthly rent. "The board is ready. Are you?" Ethan straightened, the mask of unshakable confidence snapping back into place. "Of course, Ricardo. Let's not keep them waiting." As he walked towards the boardroom, Ricardo clapped him on the shoulder. "Ophelia is a smart girl. She picked a winner. You're not just marrying my daughter, son. You're inheriting a legacy. Don't mess it up." The words were a strange mix of welcome and warning. It was always like this with Ricardo. He was being given the keys to the kingdom, but he was also constantly being reminded that he was an outsider, a guest in the palace. His position, his success, was contingent on the approval of men like Ricardo. He was a Blackwell, not a De La Cruz, not yet. The meeting was a blur of numbers and projections. Ethan was brilliant, navigating the complex negotiations with practiced ease. He was charming when he needed to be, ruthless when the moment called for it. This was his arena, the place where he was most himself, where his ambition was not just accepted but celebrated. But even as he spoke, a small, traitorous part of his mind kept drifting back to Naomi. He remembered their tiny first apartment, how they'd painted the walls themselves, laughing and splattering each other with cheap latex paint. He remembered her poring over her design books, her face alive with passion, her talent so raw and obvious. He had been the one to encourage her, to tell her she could be a star. When had that changed? It had been a slow erosion. His own ambition began to eclipse hers. Her dreams became secondary, a hobby to be indulged while he pursued the real prize. When her family's financial troubles hit, his fear had crystallized into contempt. He saw her as a liability, a reflection of the failure he so desperately feared. Leaving her had felt like survival. Later that evening, at a charity gala with Ophelia on his arm, the feeling resurfaced. The ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds and old money. Ophelia, in a stunning emerald gown, was in her element, moving through the crowd with an easy grace. Ethan played his part, shaking hands, making connections, every smile perfectly calibrated. "Darling," Ophelia said, squeezing his arm, "you seem distracted tonight." "Just thinking about the merger," he lied smoothly. "A lot of moving parts." "Don't worry," she whispered, her eyes shining with adoration. "My father is so impressed with you. We're all so proud." He looked at her, this beautiful, trusting woman who was about to become his wife. He was giving her a lie, a carefully curated version of himself. She had no idea about the woman from his past, the one he was trying to exorcise with a single cruel invitation. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name, not quite guilt, but a hollow sort of ache. He was Ethan Blackwell. He was on the verge of having everything he'd ever wanted. So why did he feel like a fraud? Why did he need the ghost of his ex-wife to be present at his coronation? The answer was as ugly as it was simple. Because without her failure to stand upon, he wasn't sure his success felt real. For 3 days after the invitation arrived, Naomi existed in a fugue state. She went through the motions of her life, making breakfast for the children, leading client calls from her small home office, reading bedtime stories, but her mind was elsewhere. It was trapped in a loop, replaying every moment of her life with Ethan, every cruel word from his goodbye note, every fear she had overcome. The invitation sat on her mantelpiece like a bomb, ticking silently, counting down to a detonation she couldn't prevent. Her first instinct was to throw it away, to pretend it never came. She could simply not go. It was the sane, self-protective thing to do. Why walk willingly into her own humiliation? Why give him the satisfaction? But the thought of his note, "No hard feelings, right?" stoked a fire in her belly that refused to be extinguished. It was the condescension, the absolute certainty he had that she was still that broken girl he'd left behind. His arrogance was a cage he'd built for her, and if she didn't show up, he would assume she was still rattling its bars. Hiding would be its own kind of surrender. On the 4th day, her best friend, Maria, came over with a bottle of cheap wine and a determination to stage an intervention. Maria had been her rock through the divorce, the one who had held her while she sobbed, the one who had brought diapers and groceries when Naomi was too proud to ask for help. "Okay, out with it," Maria said, pouring 2 generous glasses of Pinot Grigio. She pointed a manicured finger at the invitation on the mantel. "I know you've been staring at that thing like it's going to bite you. What are you going to do, Lena?" Naomi sighed, sinking into her worn-out sofa. "I don't know. Part of me wants to go just to wipe that smug look off his face. The other part knows I'll probably just burst into tears and prove him right." "Prove what right?" Maria challenged, her dark eyes flashing. "That he's a world-class jerk? Honey, that's already a well-established fact." "That I'm nothing without him," Naomi whispered, the old insecurity a bitter taste in her mouth. "That he was right to leave me behind." Maria set her glass down with a firm thud. "Naomi Park, you listen to me. You built a business from scratch while raising 3 human beings. You are the strongest person I know. He didn't leave you behind. He set you free. He's the one who's trapped, marrying into some dynasty because he's too insecure to build his own." Her words were a balm, but the fear still lingered. "But Maria, look at this place," Naomi said, gesturing around the small, cluttered apartment. "This is my life. It's real, but it's not the plaza. I can't compete with that. I don't even own anything that's not from a consignment shop." "So what?" Maria shot back. "You think this is about competing. This isn't a competition. This is a declaration. You don't go there to fight him on his terms. You go there to show him that his terms don't matter anymore." It was then that an idea, audacious and terrifying, began to form in Naomi's mind. It started as a flicker and quickly grew into a raging fire. Maria was right. This wasn't about competing. It was about changing the narrative. Ethan had written a story where he was the king and she was the pauper. What if she showed up and refused to play her part? "What if I didn't go as me?" Naomi said slowly, her eyes lighting up. Maria looked confused. "What, are you going to wear a mask?" "No," Naomi said. a genuine smile spreading across her face for the first time in days. "I'm going to go as the CEO of Rivera Design. I'm going to go as the woman I've become, not the girl he left." The decision, once made, was like a dam breaking. The lethargy and fear washed away, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and purpose. For the next week and a half, Naomi's apartment transformed into a war room. Her first call was to her accountant. She'd been saving obsessively, pouring every spare dollar back into her business or into a fund for the children's future. She'd lived frugally, denying herself any luxury. Now she was going to make a withdrawal. It wasn't an expense. It was an investment in herself. "I need to rent a town car for the day," she told Maria, who was now her enthusiastic co-conspirator. "No, not a town car, a limo, a big, black, ridiculously opulent limo." "I love where your head's at," Maria cackled. Next was the dress. She wouldn't just buy a new dress, she would leverage her own talent. She spent 2 sleepless nights at her drafting table, sketching. The design that emerged was magnificent, a gown of deep sapphire silk that was elegant, powerful, and utterly breathtaking. It was a dress that didn't whisper, it commanded. She called in a favor with a high-end seamstress she'd worked with on a branding project, promising her 2 future design consultations in exchange for a rush job. Then came the children. They were 5 years old, bright and beautiful, and the spitting image of their father. They were the one truth that could shatter Ethan's carefully constructed world. She sat them down and explained in simple terms that they were going to a big party to see someone she used to know a long time ago. Lily, ever the serious one, asked, "Is he a nice man?" Naomi paused, the lie dying on her lips. "He's a man who needs to learn something, sweetie, and we're going to help teach him." She bought them beautiful custom-tailored outfits, tiny tuxedos for the boys and a matching sapphire dress for Zoe. They looked like miniature royalty. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place unexpectedly. While coordinating a branding package for a new luxury hotel, she was on a call with their head of PR, a sharp, well-connected woman named Catherine. Naomi mentioned offhandedly that she would be attending a wedding at the plaza. "The Blackwell de la Cruz wedding?" Catherine asked, her interest piqued. "That's the event of the season. The press is going to be all over it. Ricardo de la Cruz knows how to make a splash." An idea, even bolder than the first, sparked in Naomi's mind. "Catherine," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I have a story for you. A better one than just another society wedding." She told Catherine everything. The backstory, the betrayal, the triplets, the invitation. She framed it not as a personal vendetta, but as a story of female empowerment, of a woman overcoming adversity and building a life on her own terms. It was a narrative that the modern media landscape would devour. Catherine was silent for a long moment. Naomi held her breath. "Naomi," Catherine finally said, her voice electric with excitement, "this isn't just a story. This is a legend in the making. Let me make a few calls. You just focus on looking fabulous. I'll make sure the right people are there to see it." As she hung up the phone, Naomi felt a profound shift within her. This was no longer just about Ethan. His petty need to shame her had become the catalyst for something so much bigger. It was a chance to finally, publicly, reclaim her own story. He had intended the wedding to be the final chapter of her defeat. He had no idea it was about to be the first chapter of her reign. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect blue sky stretching over Manhattan, a sky Ethan took as a personal blessing from the universe. Everything was perfect. The plaza's grand ballroom was a veritable forest of white roses and orchids. The champagne was flowing, the string quartet was playing Vivaldi, and his bride, Ophelia, was an ethereal vision in custom Vera Wang. He stood near the grand entrance, a glass of champagne in his hand, accepting congratulations with a smile that felt both genuine and rehearsed. He was the king in his castle, the master of his fate. He scanned the crowd, a subtle predatory gleam in his eyes. He was looking for her. He'd saved a seat for her at a table in the back, near the kitchens, a final petty flourish. He imagined her slipping in, head down, hoping not to be noticed. The thought filled him with a dark, satisfying thrill. "You look so happy," Ophelia murmured, linking her arm through his. Her eyes, full of uncomplicated love, searched his face. "Is everything okay?" "More than okay," he said, kissing her forehead. "Everything is perfect, just waiting on one last guest." Ophelia tilted her head. "Oh, anyone I know?" "No one important," he said smoothly. "Just an old acquaintance from another lifetime." He saw the flicker of curiosity in her eyes and relished it. The mystery would make the reveal even more delicious. He wanted Ophelia to see the contrast, to appreciate the upgrade she represented. It was cruel to both women, a fact his conscience conveniently ignored. Meanwhile, 20 blocks south, in a suite at the Mandarin Oriental that Naomi had booked for the day, a different kind of perfection was being assembled. The sapphire gown fit her like a second skin, the silk cool and empowering against her skin. A professional hair and makeup artist Maria had insisted on hiring was putting the final touches on her, sweeping her dark hair into an elegant chignon and giving her a smoky eye that made her look mysterious and formidable. Naomi stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was not the timid girl Ethan had married, nor the exhausted single mother of the last 5 years. This was someone new, someone forged in fire. There were still faint shadows of hardship around her eyes, but now they looked like wisdom, not weariness. The children were buzzing with excitement, little dynamos of energy in their formal wear. Zoe twirled in her sapphire dress, a miniature version of her mother. Lily was carefully inspecting his cufflinks, while Sienna was trying to see if he could slide across the polished marble floor in his new dress shoes. "Okay, my little superstars," Naomi said, kneeling down to look them in the eye. "Remember the plan. We walk in, we find our seats, and we are perfectly polite. No sliding, Sienna." "Is that the man we're going to teach a lesson?" Zoe asked, her voice piping. Naomi's heart clenched. "Yes, sweetie, but the best lessons are taught with kindness and dignity. We're just going to show him who we are." Maria, who had been orchestrating the day like a 4-star general, stepped back and looked at them. Her eyes were misty. "Lena, you look like a queen with her royal court." "Wish me luck," Naomi whispered, her nerves finally starting to fray. "Luck is for amateurs," Maria said, pulling her into a fierce hug. "You've got this. Now go burn his whole world down." The ride in the limo was surreal. The children pressed their faces to the tinted windows, mesmerized by the city lights. Naomi sat back against the plush leather, her hands clasped in her lap, her breathing slow and steady. She was repeating a mantra in her head. "I am not his past. I am his future. I am his." As they pulled up to the grand entrance of the plaza, Naomi saw them, a small, discreet cluster of photographers, their long lenses pointed not at the main entrance, but at their limo. Catherine's work. A small, sly smile touched Naomi's lips. Ethan wanted a private humiliation. She was about to give him a public reckoning. Back in the ballroom, Ethan was growing impatient. The ceremony was about to begin. He checked his watch. Maybe she wouldn't come after all. The thought was surprisingly disappointing. The victory felt hollow without a vanquished foe to witness it. Just then, one of the wedding planners, a flustered young woman with a headset, hurried over to Ricardo de la Cruz and whispered something in his ear. Ricardo's bushy eyebrows shot up. He strode over to Ethan. "There's a bit of a commotion outside," Ricardo said, his voice low and gravelly. "Some paparazzi, and a black limo just pulled up that's not on our guest list." Ethan's heart gave a strange, excited leap. It had to be her, but a limo? Paparazzi? It didn't make sense. He felt a prickle of unease, the first crack in his perfect day. "I'm sure it's nothing," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. But it was something. The low murmur of the crowd near the entrance began to grow. Heads were turning. Whispers rippled through the ballroom like a breeze before a storm. Ethan and Ophelia, along with Ricardo, turned to see what was causing the stir. The grand doors of the ballroom swung open, and there she stood. It was Naomi, but it was not. The woman in the doorway was a vision. The sapphire gown clung to her curves, a slash of defiant color in the sea of pale pastels and black tuxedos. Her head was held high, her expression serene and unreadable. She looked like she owned the very ground she stood on. For a moment, Ethan forgot to breathe. This was not the broken, mousy woman he had summoned. This was a goddess, a Valkyrie. But the real blow, the one that buckled his knees and sucked the air from his lungs, came a second later. Stepping out from behind her, holding her hands, were 3 small children. 2 boys in identical tuxedos and a little girl in a sapphire dress. And all 3 of them had his face, his chin, his eyes. It was like looking at a fractured reflection of himself, at a life he'd never known he'd created, and then destroyed. They walked forward, a silent, stunning procession. Naomi's gaze swept the room, calm and deliberate, before finally landing on him. In her eyes there was no pain, no anger, no love. There was only a cool, devastating pity. The string quartet faltered, the last note of Vivaldi hanging in the air like a question. 100 conversations died at once. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic tap of Naomi's heels on the marble floor as she walked toward him, their triplets in tow, to claim a future he never knew he'd thrown away. The world narrowed for Ethan until it was only the approaching figures of Naomi and the 3 children. His champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo the fracturing of his reality. The noise barely registered over the roaring in his ears. This was impossible. A trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by stress and champagne. But the children were real. Their small, serious faces were turned up towards him, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in their eyes. His eyes. Ophelia gasped beside him, her hand flying to her mouth. "Ethan! Who is that? Who are those children?" Her voice was a thin, sharp whisper, laced with the first threads of confusion and betrayal. He couldn't answer. His tongue felt thick, useless. He could only stare as Naomi came to a stop a few feet in front of them, her posture radiating a calm that felt more threatening than any scream. She didn't look at Ophelia or Ricardo. Her entire focus was on him, a laser beam of judgment. Zoe, the little girl, tugged on Naomi's hand. "Is that him, Mummy?" she asked, her voice carrying with startling clarity in the tomb-like silence of the ballroom. The man who needed a lesson. The words, so innocent and yet so damning, struck Ethan with the force of a physical blow. A wave of nervous laughter and shocked murmurs rippled through the assembled guests. Ricardo de la Cruz's face, which had been jovial moments before, was now a thundercloud of fury. He took a step forward, his eyes boring into Ethan. "Explain this," he growled. "Now," Naomi finally spoke, her voice smooth and even, betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. She addressed Ethan, but her words were for the entire room. "Ethan, I received your invitation. You said you wanted me to see how things had worked out for you. So I thought it was only fair that you see how things have worked out for me too." She gently pushed the children forward a small step. "Allow me to introduce you to your sons, Lily and Sienna, and your daughter Zoe. They just turned 5. The collective gasp of the wedding guests was a physical force. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. 5 years old. The timeline was a brutal, undeniable calculation in his head. He had left her, and weeks later she would have known. She had been pregnant with his children, 3 of them, and she had never told him. He staggered back a step, colliding with a floral arrangement. White rose petals rained down on his shoulders like ashes. "No," he croaked, shaking his head. "It's not. I didn't know. Didn't you?" Naomi's voice was soft, but it cut him to the bone. Or was it just more convenient not to? "You were so busy building your new life you never bothered to look back at the one you destroyed. Ophelia finally found her voice, turning on him, her beautiful face a mask of disbelief and horror. "Ethan, what is she talking about? You told me you had no children. You told me your marriage was a brief, youthful mistake. It was... I thought..." He stammered, his mind a maelstrom of panic. He was exposed. The confident, powerful man he had so carefully constructed was dissolving in real time, revealing the desperate, hollow fraud underneath. The guests were no longer looking at him with admiration, but with a delicious, scandalized pity. He was the evening's entertainment. Ricardo de la Cruz stepped between them, his presence a wall of icy authority. He ignored Ethan completely, his gaze fixed on Naomi. His expression was hard, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Not pity, but a shrewd, calculating respect. "A Miss Park," Ricardo said, his voice a low rumble. "I believe my daughter, my family and I have been grievously misled." Naomi met his gaze without flinching. "I believe you have, Mr. de la Cruz. I'm sorry that your family has been brought into this. My only intention was to answer an invitation that was sent with malicious intent." She held up the small, monogrammed note Ethan had written. "He invited me here to shame me, to parade his success in front of what he assumed was my failure. He just didn't realize my greatest success was the secret I was forced to keep." The narrative had been flipped so completely, so masterfully, that Ethan could only watch in stunned silence. He was no longer the benevolent victor. He was the villain of the story. The deadbeat dad, the liar. The flashes started then. The photographers Catherine had tipped off had found their way inside, their cameras erupting in a blitz of light, capturing every detail of the drama. Ethan's ashen face, Ophelia's tear-streaked cheeks, Ricardo's stony fury, and Naomi, standing tall and serene amidst the chaos, a protective hand on each of her children's shoulders. Ophelia tore the diamond engagement ring from her finger and threw it at Ethan's chest. It struck him with a dull thud before clattering to the floor. "It's over," she sobbed, before turning and running from the ballroom, her perfect wedding dress trailing behind her like a shroud. The spell was broken. The room erupted into a cacophony of panicked whispers and scurrying feet. The wedding planner was having a frantic, whispered conversation into her headset. The string quartet began packing their instruments. The dream was over. Ethan was left standing alone in the center of the ruins, the flashes of the cameras like relentless accusations. He finally looked at his children, truly looked at them. Lily was watching him with a solemn, analytical gaze that felt unnervingly familiar. Sienna was hiding behind Naomi's dress, peeking out with suspicion. And Zoe was just looking at him with a child's open, heartbreaking curiosity. What had he done? In his blind, desperate ambition, in his need to erase his past and validate his present, he had committed a crime far worse than abandonment. He had orphaned his own children from his life, from the knowledge of their father, all for the sake of his own fragile ego. Naomi gathered her children, her mission accomplished. She had not come for a scene, but a statement, and the statement had been made. She turned to leave, her back straight, her dignity intact. "Naomi, wait!" Ethan called out, his voice hoarse. It was a plea. She paused at the doorway, but didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said, her voice clear and final. "I hope you got the closure you were looking for." And then she was gone, leaving him alone in the wreckage of his perfect day, the blinding flashes of the cameras the only spotlight on his spectacular, self-inflicted demise. The aftermath was a swift and brutal demolition. Ethan's carefully constructed world did not just crack. It was obliterated, leveled as if by a controlled explosion. The wedding fiasco was more than just a scandal. It was a business liability. And in the world Ricardo de la Cruz inhabited, there was no greater sin. The headlines the next morning were merciless. Photos of Naomi's regal entrance and Ophelia's tearful exit were plastered across every gossip blog and society page. "Groom's secret triplets crash plaza wedding," screamed one. De la Cruz Jerez jilts fiancé at altar amidst paternity bombshell, declared another. Catherine, Naomi's PR contact, had masterfully spun the narrative. Naomi was portrayed as a wronged but resilient single mother, a brilliant entrepreneur who had been cruelly summoned by her callous ex-husband. Ethan was cast as the irredeemable villain, a social climbing fraud who had lied to everyone. He was fired before noon. The summons came not as a phone call, but as a terse email from Ricardo's personal assistant requesting his presence at the De La Cruz headquarters. When Ethan arrived, he wasn't led to the lavish executive suite, but to a small, sterile conference room. Ricardo was waiting for him, not with anger, but with a cold, surgical detachment that was far more terrifying. "The merger is off," Ricardo stated without preamble. He gestured to a box on the table containing the few personal items from Ethan's former office. "Your access has been revoked. Security will escort you from the building." Ethan gaped at him. "Ricardo, please, I can fix this. It's a personal matter. It has nothing to do with my performance, with my value to the company." Ricardo let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your value? Your value was predicated on your judgment, your character. You were supposed to be my son-in-law, a future leader of this company. Instead, you've shown the world you are a man with no integrity. You built your life on a lie, Ethan. A man who lies to his fiancée about having 3 children is a man who will lie to his partners about financials. You are a risk I am no longer willing to take. You've made the De La Cruz name a laughingstock. That is not a personal matter, it is a declaration of war." There was no arguing, no appeal. The decision was absolute. As 2 stone-faced security guards led him to the elevator, past the whispering, staring employees who had lauded him just yesterday, Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him. In the space of 24 hours, he had lost his fiancée, his career, his reputation, and the future he had sacrificed everything to build. The days that followed were a descent into a personal hell. The lock on his penthouse apartment was changed. It was a wedding gift from Ricardo, and the gift had been rescinded. His corporate cards were cancelled. His phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, former colleagues expressing clipped, insincere condolences, and lawyers. Ophelia had filed a lawsuit for emotional distress and fraud. He ended up in a sterile, overpriced hotel room, living off his dwindling personal savings. The panoramic view of Central Park was replaced by a grimy window overlooking an air shaft. The silence was the worst part. There were no meetings to rush to, no adoring fiancé to come home to, no grand future to plan. There was only the gaping void of his failure and the constant replaying image of 3 small faces that looked just like his. For the first time in his life, stripped of all the external markers of his identity, the job, the money, the status, Ethan was forced to confront the man in the mirror, and he despised what he saw. He'd always told himself that his ambition was a noble thing, a drive to create a better life, but now he saw it for what it was, a ravenous, insatiable hunger born of deep insecurity. He hadn't been building a life. He'd been running from the fear of being ordinary, the fear of being the son of a struggling accountant from Ohio. He had seen people, including Naomi, not as partners, but as assets or liabilities on his personal balance sheet. He'd liquidated the asset he deemed non-performing, his wife, and was about to acquire a blue-chip stock in Ophelia. He thought of Naomi, not the avenging angel from the wedding, but the young woman he had once loved. He remembered her fierce loyalty, her quiet strength. She would never have abandoned him if the situations were reversed. She would have fought for them. He had mistaken her goodness for weakness, her love as something he was entitled to. The biggest revelation, the one that brought him to his knees in the soulless hotel room, was about his children. He was a father. He had 3 children in the world. For 5 years they had been growing up just a few miles away, and he'd had no idea. He tried to imagine their lives, their first steps, Their first words, Christmases, birthdays, all had passed without him. Naomi had done it all alone. While he was closing deals and dining at Michelin-star restaurants, she had been navigating fevers, scraped knees, and bedtime stories for 3. The shame was a physical illness, a poison in his blood. The wedding invitation, his grand power move, was now exposed for what it was, the pathetic, desperate act of a profoundly weak man. He hadn't invited her to shame her. He had invited her because, on some subconscious level, he needed her to absolve him. He needed her to be miserable so that his own choices would feel justified. One rainy afternoon, a week after the wedding, he found himself standing across the street from a small elementary school in Queens. He had hired a private investigator, one of the last acts he could afford, to find her address. He just wanted to see them. He saw Naomi first, waiting by the school gates with other parents. She looked different without the glamorous armor of the wedding. She looked tired but happy. She was chatting with another mother, a genuine smile on her face. Then the bell rang and a flood of children poured out. Lily, Sienna, and Zoe ran straight to her, wrapping their small arms around her legs. Ethan watched from the shadows of a coffee shop awning, a hollow ache in his chest so profound it felt like his ribs would crack. He watched as she knelt down, wiping a smudge of chocolate from Sienna's cheek, adjusting Lily's backpack, and retying Zoe's hair ribbon. It was a portrait of love, of a family complete and whole without him. He was a ghost, a stranger looking in on a life he had forfeited. He was utterly, irrevocably irrelevant. And in that moment, he finally understood. This wasn't a punishment. This was a consequence. The media storm, as intense as it was, eventually moved on to the next scandal. For Naomi, the quiet that followed was a relief. Her life, for the first time in a long while, felt entirely her own. The story had given her business an unexpected, massive boost. Clients, mostly women, were drawn to her narrative of resilience and creative power. She was no longer just a talented designer. She was a symbol. She hired 2 more employees, leased a beautiful new office space in Dumbo with a view of the Brooklyn Bridge, and finally moved her family out of the cramped Queens apartment into a spacious brownstone with a small backyard. The new house was filled with light and laughter. The children could run and play, and Naomi finally had a dedicated studio where her ideas could breathe. She was making more money than she had ever dreamed of, but the real wealth was the peace of mind she had fought so hard to win. She had security, a thriving career, and a happy, loving home for her children. She had done it all herself. Yet, amidst the success, the ghost of Ethan lingered, not as a source of pain anymore, but as an unresolved question. Her children were starting to ask about their father with more frequency and detail. "Does he have dark hair like me?" Lily would ask. "Is he funny?" Sienna wanted to know. Zoe just wanted to know why he wasn't there. Naomi answered their questions as honestly as she could, without bitterness. "He made some big mistakes," she would tell them. "He got lost for a while, but you are the best parts of him, and all the best parts of me." It was an answer, but she knew it wouldn't be enough forever. They deserved to know their father, and perhaps he deserved a chance to know them, not for his sake, but for theirs. About 6 months after the wedding, she received a letter. It was from Ethan. His familiar, confident script was gone, replaced by hesitant, almost shaky handwriting. Her first instinct was to throw it away, unopened. But her curiosity and a deeper sense of needing to close this final chapter made her sit down at her kitchen table and slit the envelope open. The letter was not what she expected. There were no excuses, no justifications. It was a raw, painful, and deeply humbling apology. "Naomi," it began, "I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing to you for that reason. I'm writing because I need to say the things I was too cowardly and arrogant to understand before. I was wrong. What I did to you, to us, was unforgivable. I was a weak man, terrified of failure, and I turned you into the scapegoat for my own insecurities. I threw away the most valuable thing in my life because I wasn't strong enough to deserve it. I have seen you with our children. I see the incredible life you've built for them. You have done it all with a grace and strength I can only now begin to comprehend. They are beautiful and they are happy, and that is all because of you. I live every day with the knowledge of what I lost. Not the money or the job, but the years. The 5 years of their lives that I can never get back. I don't expect to be a part of their lives. I forfeited that right. But I want to be a part of their future, if you would ever allow it. I want to contribute. I want to set up a trust for their education. I want to be whatever you will let me be to them. A name in a letter, a distant uncle, anything. They deserve more than a father who was a ghost. I am working now for a small accounting firm in New Jersey. It's quiet. It's honest work. I'm starting over. I'm trying to become a man who might one day be worthy of being their father. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. I am, and always will be, sorry. Ethan. Naomi read the letter 3 times, the paper trembling in her hands. The rage she had held onto for so long had vanished, leaving a hollow space behind. In its place was a complex, weary sadness. He was broken. The world had broken him, and in doing so had finally made him see the truth. This was not the Ethan she had known. This was a man stripped bare, facing his own ruin. Redemption, she realized, wasn't about her forgiving him. It was about him forgiving himself, and that was a journey he had to walk alone. But her children, their journey was another matter. Denying them a father, even a flawed and repentant one, felt like a punishment that didn't fit their crime of simply being born. A month later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Naomi sat on a bench in Central Park. A few yards away, Lily, Sienna, and Zoe were throwing a frisbee with a man who looked nervous and overwhelmingly grateful. Ethan. She had agreed to this. A supervised public meeting. No promises, no expectations. Just a beginning. He looked older. The sharp, tailored suits were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. There were lines of regret etched around his eyes. But as he knelt to show Sienna how to hold the frisbee, as he patiently answered Lily's barrage of questions, as he smiled a watery, hesitant smile at Zoe, Naomi saw a flicker of the man she had once loved. The charming, kind man before ambition had poisoned him. She didn't know what the future held. She knew she would never love him again, would never trust him with her heart. That part of her life was over, but as she watched him with their children, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't for him. It wasn't even entirely for her. It was for them. It was giving them a chance to have a father and giving him a chance to be one. Her redemption had never been about his downfall. It had been about her rise. It had been about building a life so full and so beautiful that his absence was no longer a hole, but simply a fact. She had found her power not in revenge, but in creation. She had created a business, a home, and a family. And in this quiet moment, watching her children laugh in the sunshine, she realized she had also created the space for a new, fragile kind of forgiveness to begin. In the end, Naomi's story wasn't about the triumph of revenge, but the quiet, unshakable power of self-worth. She walked into her ex-husband's world, not to destroy it, but to show him it no longer had any power over hers. By choosing to build a future for her children instead of dwelling on the betrayals of the past, she found a victory far sweeter than any vengeance. Her journey reminds us that true strength isn't about how we weather the storm, but how we learn to build a new life in the calm that follows. What did you think of Naomi's incredible story of resilience? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and empowering stories.